The house was not hidden, and that was the first thing people later struggled to explain. It stood in plain sight at the far end of Alder Creek Road, where the asphalt thinned into uneven gray patches, and the town quietly admitted it no longer cared what happened beyond that point. I remember driving past it dozens of times before anyone ever associated it with fear. At the time, it was just another structure. 2 floors, pale siding, narrow windows, a porch that looked too clean for a place so close to the woods. Nothing about it suggested tragedy. Nothing warned us. That absence of warning is what unsettles me now, because evil, when it is real, rarely announces itself. It blends into zoning regulations, property taxes, and signed documents. The Carter family purchased the house in March. I know this because I later reviewed the county records myself, not as a journalist or an investigator, but as someone who needed to understand how a normal transaction could end in a complete erasure of human presence. The sale was routine. No liens, no disputes, no unusual clauses. The previous owner had lived there alone for nearly a decade and sold it after relocating for work. There were no complaints filed, no emergency calls tied to the address, no insurance anomalies. On paper, the house was clean, perfectly clean. The Carvers themselves were equally unremarkable. Daniel Carter, 43, worked as a regional logistics coordinator for a mid-sized distribution company. Stable income, predictable schedule. His wife, Elaine, taught high school literature. Tenure track, respected, quiet. Their children, Mark and Lily, were enrolled in the local school within days of moving in. Attendance records show they never missed a day, until they missed all of them at once. That detail would come later, buried in administrative logs that no one expected to become evidence. Neighbors described the family using the same words over and over again: polite, private, normal. One woman told police she remembered Elaine waving once while taking out the trash, a gesture so insignificant it only became meaningful in hindsight. Another neighbor recalled seeing Daniel mowing the lawn on a Saturday morning, stopping briefly to answer a work call, then resuming as if nothing had happened. These were not people hiding from the world. They were participating in it just enough to avoid attention. The first irregularity was so minor it barely deserved the word. A grocery delivery left on the porch for several hours longer than usual, then another, then a third. Packages accumulated in neat stacks, untouched. No porch camera footage showed anyone retrieving them. No footage showed anyone stealing them either. They simply stayed where they were placed until drivers reported the address as unresponsive. At the time, most people assumed vacation. Families leave town all the time. The idea that a house could remain occupied yet untouched did not occur to anyone yet. What did register, quietly, was the darkness. After sunset, the house emitted no light, no television glow, no bedside lamps, no silhouettes behind curtains, and yet power company records later confirmed consistent electricity usage, especially during evening hours. Something inside that house was drawing power. The numbers did not lie. Then there was the porch light. It began almost as a curiosity. At exactly 9:17 p.m., the porch light flickered on. 3 seconds later, it went dark again. It did this every night, always at the same minute, always the same duration. People noticed because patterns are comforting until they become precise. Precision suggests intent. Intent demands explanation. No one ever saw who triggered it. No footsteps, no door opening, just light, then absence. I spoke to a retired engineer years later who lived across the street. He told me he started setting a watch by it, not because he was afraid, but because he liked knowing something in the world still followed rules. When I asked him if he ever considered calling the police earlier, he shook his head. "For what?" he said. "A light turning on?" That answer haunts me because it reveals how thin the line is between safety and catastrophe. How much silence we tolerate because paperwork looks correct and routines remain unbroken. No one reported screams, no one reported arguments, no one reported anything at all. The house existed in a state of quiet compliance, paying its bills, consuming electricity, occupying space, while slowly detaching from the people inside it. By the time the front door was found open weeks later, the town had already accepted the house as a place that did not require explanation. That acceptance would prove costly. The front door was discovered open on a Tuesday morning, which later struck investigators as an unremarkable detail with disproportionate consequences. Tuesdays are administrative days. People notice things less. A neighbor walking his dog noticed the door because the dog stopped suddenly, refusing to move closer, its posture stiff in a way animals reserve for things humans cannot see. The neighbor later admitted he almost ignored it. An open door, after all, is not a crime. It becomes one only when paired with absence. When police arrived, they followed protocol slowly, methodically, as if the house deserved respect rather than urgency. There were no sirens, no tape, no crowd, just paperwork beginning its transformation into a case file. Inside, the air felt used. That was the word one officer chose in his report, a rare moment of subjectivity that survived revision. Used air implies recent presence, recent breathing. The kitchen table was set for dinner, 4 plates, 4 glasses, 1 pot still warm to the touch. This detail mattered because it collapsed the timeline. Whatever happened did not occur gradually. It interrupted something ordinary. Normal life had been cut mid-sentence. Phones were found throughout the house. Elaine's phone lay face down near the sink, vibrating intermittently with missed calls from the school administration, asking why she had not shown up for work. Daniel's phone was on the coffee table, battery nearly drained, the call log filled with short outgoing calls that connected to nothing. The children's devices were found upstairs, untouched, charged, silent. No goodbye messages, no panicked texts, no unfinished drafts. In modern disappearances, phones usually betray intent. Here, they revealed nothing except synchronized failure. The bedrooms showed no signs of packing. Clothes hung neatly. Drawers were closed. Toothbrushes were still damp, a fact that suggested routine had been followed that morning. Police documented every square inch. They looked for blood under sinks, behind furniture, inside drains. They found none. They checked windows, locked. They checked the basement, empty. The attic, undisturbed. Even the crawl space beneath the stairs was inspected, a place large enough to hide fear, if not bodies. Nothing. The dog's absence troubled officers more than the missing people. Animals resist coercion. They fight, they bark, they leave evidence. There was none. The bowl was full. The leash hung by the door. The dog had vanished with the same compliance as its owners. Then they found the camera. It was positioned deliberately, mounted with care, aimed at the hallway that connected the living room to the bedrooms. Not hidden, not advertised, just present. When questioned later, acquaintances could not recall Daniel mentioning any interest in surveillance or security. The camera had no brand markings, no visible storage device. It was powered directly through the house's electrical system. Reviewing the footage took hours. Nothing happened for most of it. People underestimate how disturbing nothing can be when it persists. Then, at 9:17 p.m., movement. The family entered the hallway calmly, no hesitation, no visible fear. Elaine adjusted her sleeve. Daniel placed a hand briefly on Mark's shoulder. Lily walked last, holding a stuffed animal. They disappeared from frame, one by one. They did not reappear. The camera continued recording for 6 more hours, capturing only the hallway, unchanged. No sound except faint electrical hum. At exactly 3:21 a.m., the feed corrupted and shut down. Investigators replayed the footage repeatedly, frame by frame. They measured light distortion. They consulted video analysts. No edits were found, no compression artifacts, no signs of tampering. The footage was authentic. That conclusion forced an uncomfortable question. Where does a family go when they leave no trace, leave willingly, and leave everything behind? The case officially shifted from welfare check to missing persons. Search teams were deployed. Dogs were brought in. Drones scanned the surrounding woods. Ground-penetrating radar examined the soil. Nothing. The house refused to give anything back. At that point, the town began to change how it spoke about the place. Not loudly, quietly. People stopped calling it the Carter House. It became that house. Language, like fear, simplifies when faced with the incomprehensible. The porch light continued to flicker at 9:17 p.m. 3 seconds, as if reminding everyone that whatever happened was not finished yet. By the 3rd week, the case no longer belonged to the local police department, though they continued to pretend it did. Officially, state investigators had taken over. Unofficially, no one wanted to put their name too close to a file that resisted logic. I later obtained copies of internal emails through a records request. The language was careful, procedural, but beneath it ran a current of quiet discomfort. Phrases like no clear mechanism, absence of actionable leads, and environmental anomaly appeared more often than they should in a missing persons case. When bureaucracy starts inventing vocabulary, it usually means reality has stopped cooperating. The first real fracture in the investigation came from the audio analysis of the hallway camera. Initially dismissed as useless due to its low fidelity, the audio track was re-examined only because an intern noticed irregular compression patterns. That alone was enough to justify a deeper look. Specialists isolated the sound waves, stripping away background noise, electrical hum, and ambient interference. What remained was not speech. It did not match any known vocal pattern. It was rhythmic, layered, and mathematically precise. At exactly 9:17 p.m., the audio amplitude increased for 3 seconds, not gradually, instantly. Then it dropped back to baseline. This happened only once. The rest of the recording was silent. Analysts compared the waveform to common household noises, air conditioning cycles, electrical surges, even distant traffic vibrations. None matched. One report noted that the frequency bands resembled overlapping breathing patterns, but without the irregularities typical of living lungs. No inhalation strain, no exhalation variance. Perfectly timed, perfectly aligned. At the same moment the audio spiked, every phone in the house initiated a call. This detail was uncovered weeks later, after telecom records were subpoenaed. Elaine's phone, Daniel's phone, even the children's devices all placed outgoing calls at 9:17 p.m. None of the calls connected to a valid number. They were not routed, They were not dropped. They existed for exactly 3 seconds in a liminal state, as if acknowledged by the network but never received. Telecom engineers described it as theoretical activity made real. That phrase was removed from the final report. Investigators tried to reconstruct motive. Financial records showed no distress. Bank accounts were stable. Mortgage payments were current. Insurance policies were unremarkable. No large withdrawals, no sudden transfers. The family was not planning to disappear. They had future obligations, school meetings, work deadlines, dental appointments. Their lives. At the same moment the audio spiked, every phone in the house initiated a call. This detail was uncovered weeks later, after telecom records were subpoenaed. Elaine's phone, Daniel's phone, even the children's devices all placed outgoing calls at 9:17 p.m. None of the calls connected to a valid number. They were not routed. They were not dropped. They existed for exactly 3 seconds in a liminal state, as if acknowledged by the network but never received. Telecom engineers described it as theoretical activity made real. That phrase was removed from the final report. Investigators tried to reconstruct motive. Financial records showed no distress. Bank accounts were stable. Mortgage payments were current. Insurance policies were unremarkable. No large withdrawals, no sudden transfers. The family was not planning to disappear. They had future obligations, school meetings, work deadlines, dental appointments. Their lives extended forward on calendars that suddenly stopped meaning anything. Psychological profiling went nowhere. There were no signs of cult involvement, no radical affiliations, no online communities suggesting preparation. Elaine's search history included lesson plans and book reviews. Daniel's included shipping schedules and weather forecasts. The children's browsing history was trivial, forgettable. Normality saturated every byte of data. As weeks turned into months, the search radius expanded. Nothing. No sightings, no tips. The case file grew thicker without becoming heavier. Information without substance. Then came the secondary phenomenon. People who entered the house after the disappearance began reporting symptoms, mild at first, disorientation, time distortion, phones losing signal in specific rooms, watches running slow. One technician reported a pressure sensation in his chest while standing in the hallway, describing it as being observed by absence. That sentence, too, was later removed. Eventually, the house was sealed, not condemned, not demolished, simply locked. It remained on the tax rolls. Utilities were disconnected. The porch light, inexplicably, continued to flicker at 9:17 p.m. Power company technicians could not explain how. The line to the house was dead. Meters showed zero consumption, and yet light occurred. Years passed. The Carter case faded into archival obscurity, referenced occasionally in training seminars as an example of unresolved disappearance. But the house remained. It resisted forgetting. New families attempted to live there. All left quickly. One couple installed their own cameras. Their footage showed nothing unusual until the 7th night. At 9:17 p.m., 4 shadows appeared on the hallway wall. They did not move. They did not align with any physical source. They simply existed for 3 seconds. The couple left at dawn. They did not file a report. Most people don't when faced with something that cannot be translated into paperwork.
The house still stands. It has an address. It has a history. It has no occupants. But every night at exactly 9:17 p.m., the porch light flickers. 3 seconds of acknowledgement, as if something inside is still keeping time. What ultimately ended the case was not evidence, but exhaustion. Not the kind that comes from effort, but the deeper fatigue that sets in when systems realize they are inadequate. By the 10th year, the Carter disappearance existed only as a reference number, cited occasionally in academic discussions about anomalous events, and quietly excluded from anything that required resolution. The official status never changed: missing, presumed alive until proven otherwise. The law demands bodies. Reality did not provide them. I requested access to the final administrative review conducted 5 years after the disappearance. It was not an investigation, merely an audit of unresolved cases slated for archival storage. The language was dry, procedural, almost apologetic. The house was mentioned only as a location, stripped of narrative. No mention of lights, no mention of audio, no mention of shadows. Those details had been relegated to appendices, where inconvenient facts are placed to avoid contaminating conclusions. But outside official channels, the house continued to accumulate testimony, not rumors, testimony. Statements given quietly, often years later, by people who had no reason to lie and no incentive to remember. Utility workers, real estate agents, temporary occupants. Each account shared the same structural features: time distortion, auditory pressure, and the sense that the house was not empty but complete, as if whatever occurred had concluded successfully, leaving no room for intrusion.
One real estate agent attempted to sell the property 6 years after the incident. She described showing the house to a retired couple relocating from out of state. Everything was normal until they stood in the hallway. The woman reportedly asked, without prompting, "Why does it feel like we're late?" The question was not answered. At 9:17 p.m. that evening, while the agent was still compiling listing photos at home, her phone dialed an outgoing call by itself. 3 seconds. No recipient. She withdrew the listing the next morning and left the profession within the year. Another account came from a municipal archivist cataloging historical properties. He spent less than 20 minutes inside the house. Later, while reviewing his notes, he discovered timestamps that did not align with reality. According to his records, he entered the house at 8:54 p.m. and exited at 9:02 p.m. Security cameras from the street showed him leaving at 9:19 p.m., 17 minutes unaccounted for. When asked, he could not recall anything occurring between those times. He remembered entering. He remembered leaving. The middle was absent. That absence is the final pattern. Not violence, not struggle. Absence. The Carter family did not leave behind chaos. They left behind continuity, as if their departure had been anticipated and accommodated by something that required them whole. No evidence suggests resistance. No evidence suggests coercion. The house did not take them by force. It received them. In the end, the property was transferred to a land trust, effectively removing it from the market without acknowledging why. It remains standing, maintained just enough to prevent decay, preserved without purpose.
a structure without function, a location without occupants, a solved process without an understood mechanism. Every year, on the anniversary of the disappearance, a brief note appears in the local police blotter. No updates, no leads, just a confirmation that the status remains unchanged. Missing. The porch light still flickers, 3 seconds, at 9:17 p.m. Witnesses report that if you stand close enough, you can hear a faint pressure in the air, like breath held collectively, not released, not strained, simply paused. The house does not want attention. It does not demand belief. It only keeps time. And time, unlike people, always comes back.